Welcome back to the Dershow. First, thank all my listeners. We yesterday had over 130,000 viewers talking about Trump and my visit with Trump, and lots and lots more letters than I think I've ever gotten. So I think we're picking up steam. And if you have friends, tell them to watch the show. If they don't like it, hey, that's why God invented the off switch. You can just change the channel. But a lot of people are watching now, and I hope more people will watch as well. It's so important to have alternate outlets, alternate media, because today it's so hard to get an objective view of the news, legal news, or other kinds of news. But I try my best. Some people think I'm objective. Some people think I'm too far right, too far left. But too pro-Trump, too anti-Trump. I get it from all sides. So just keep watching and keep writing me letters. President Trump's taking the offensive. I think he's really feeling his muscle. I'm not going to take any credit for this. I met with him on Saturday, and I encouraged him to fight against lawfare, and the whole event on Saturday night was directed against lawfare. And just today, yesterday as well, he has gone proactive. He filed a lawsuit against Judge Marchant, and he has filed an appeal and prevailed, at least at the moment, as part of the appeal, to prevent the public disclosure of the one-sided, obviously biased reports of the special counsel. And the judge in Florida issued an order staying it until the Court of Appeals could hear it. And we'll see what happens in Washington, D.C. But what's going on is just an utter disgrace to the rule of law. The idea that these folks in New York, Alvin Bragg and Letitia James and Judge Marchant and others, they are determined to see that he and everybody around him start the new administration with a stigma. His lawyers have been disbarred. Rudy Giuliani has been held in contempt. John Eastman has been disbarred and is subject to 2 criminal prosecutions. And of course, Judge Marchant and Alvin Bragg are trying to manipulate the system so that they can get a sentence down and dirty a week or so, just a little bit more than a week before he becomes president. So he becomes a convicted felon president. Again, let me remind you that under the law, you're not convicted until you're sentenced. They can say that a jury found him guilty, but the actual conviction becomes operative only upon sentencing. And that's a two-edged sword. Number one, it means he can't appeal until he's sentenced, and he hasn't been able to appeal. I think if he had been able to appeal, he would have, and very likely by this time the conviction would have been reversed. But in addition to that, you can't call him a convicted felon. Everybody does, but that's not right. He's not a convicted felon until he's sentenced. The judge, understanding that he's to be the president of the United States, has said he's not going to sentence him to jail or to probation or to home arrest or anything like that. He's going to let him go free, but he's going to be sure that he is a convicted felon, even though nobody can describe what he's been convicted of. I've asked so many people, lawyers and others, all right, what was he convicted of? And then, they start saying, well, there was this misdemeanor. Well, it really wasn't a misdemeanor because he didn't do anything wrong. He listed a payment of $100,000 to a lawyer for a woman who was making an accusation which he believed was false to settle the case. And he listed it, or some secretary who was filling out the forms listed it as a legal expense, which is what I would have done. And I think what any reasonable person would have done. It was a legal expense. It wasn't a vacation. It wasn't to buy a new car. It was a legal expense to settle a lawsuit. So, so wait a minute. It was a misdemeanor, but it wasn't really a misdemeanor, but it was barred by the statute of limitations. But wait a minute. If he did it, if he filed it as a legal expense in order 2 years later to take it as a tax deduction, which he didn't do, well, maybe he had an intent to commit another crime when he was committing the non-crime. And if he had this intent to commit another crime, then it avoids the statute of limitations, turns it into a felony, and allows him to be convicted of 34 felonies because he wrote the same thing down 34 times. People think he committed 34 different crimes. The same crime committed 34 different times. So, the notion that you can, and then the jury is told you don't have to agree on what was in his mind, what the second crime was. Some of you may think it was an attempt to evade the tax laws. It's okay. Some of you don't agree with that and might think it was an attempt to evade the election laws. And some of you may think it was just an attempt to prevent the government from learning about the non-misdemeanor. So that turns it into a 34 felonies, not barred by the statute of limitations. It's laughable. If a student wrote an exam saying this is what we can do, how to concoct a crime, I would tell the student, to go to the business school or go to the divinity school. Law is not your profession. Or become a judge. Then you can do anything you want. That's what Marchand did. He did anything he wanted. Or become a prosecutor. Remember, too, the prosecutor didn't want to charge him because he searched through the books and he couldn't find anything. Again, Lavrenti Beria and Stalin, show me the man, I'll find you the crime. So he couldn't find the crime. There was no misdemeanor. There was no federal crime. There was no state crime. There was no felony. So he couldn't find the crime, which is what Stalin told Lavrenti Beria to do. So he made one up. He just made one up, which is why I've said in my 62 years of practicing, teaching, writing about criminal law, probably more than any current lawyer in the country, I cannot understand this crime. I can't understand it. We talked about it. I talked about it with President Trump. It's just not comprehensible. As he said to me, too, there's not even a misdemeanor here. What's the misdemeanor? Having somebody, he probably didn't even make the decision. The decision was made by some underling to simply list it as a legal expense. He didn't deduct it. He just listed it. I think there was a chart of a fall down thing where you can pick 1, 2, 3, or 4, and one of them was legal expense. It was checked off. That's not a crime. That's just not a crime. Again, Thomas Jefferson, for something to be a crime, the statute has to be so clear that a reasonable person could understand it if he reads it while running. I'm sitting. I actually told that to President Trump, and he got a good laugh out of that. So I'm hoping, now that President Trump has gone offensive and proactive, that the appellate courts will begin to give a hard look at some of these things. But remember, these are elected judges, and they're whether they get to be a judge with an interim appointment or get promoted is determined by the Democratic machine largely, and the Democratic machine doesn't like Donald Trump. And so the question is, will the appellate courts do the right thing? Now, I think the Supreme Court of the United States will do the right thing, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of the liberals went along, because I'm a liberal. We're supposed to be concerned about fairness and due process. We're supposed to be concerned about the Constitution. We're not supposed to be concerned with partisan outcomes. Is this good or bad for Donald Trump? If the issue was it good or bad for Donald Trump? First of all, nobody seems to know, because obviously it backfired. And a lot of Americans, maybe even some who were on the fence, not decided who to vote for, said, look, I can't vote for this lawfare business. It's just not right. And so it may have pushed them over the edge to vote for Donald Trump and against lawfare. And this is inevitable. No matter how many speeches I make or others make saying, oh, well, the Democrats did it wrong, but the Republicans shouldn't do the same thing. Of course, some will. Of course, some will. Of course, you're going to get some people going after Democrats now unjustifiably. If it's justifiable, sure, they ought to go after them. But they ought not. The Republicans ought not to sink to the level of the Democrats. Again, it's one of the worst things that's happened legally, as far as I'm concerned, to our system after January 6th. This attempt to destroy the Constitution, make up crimes, go after people. The 65 Project, again, what a terrible, terrible organization. I'd love to see people bring lawsuits against them and try to find out who really funded them. Probably George Soros. I don't know for sure, but Soros certainly earned his Democratic prize because he has funded all these radical left-wing free criminal prosecutors around the country. Many of them have either left office or are not likely to win re-election. They're not winning any popularity contests from where they are. I'm still shocked that Fani Willis won re-election. It's in a county where they probably like what she did, but what an incompetent district attorney. And Alvin Bragg, we know Alvin Bragg got resources from George Soros. So, George Soros bought his Medal of Freedom by contributing heavily to the Democratic Party and to aspects of the Democratic Party, which probably helped them lose this election. I mean, George Soros probably contributed to their loss because he was Mr. Lawfare in many ways. He's the guy who put in office the people who engaged in lawfare, not only by going after people like Donald Trump, but by failing to go after real criminals and by prioritizing political prosecutions over safety. And New York's become such a dangerous place. I tell my grandchildren not to take the subways. People are being burned alive on the subways, people pushed on the track. We saw what happened when a brave guy, Penny, tried to stop a crazy person from terrorizing a train. He gets prosecuted, cost him probably time, effort, money. He was acquitted, of course, as he should have been, but still, the subways aren't safe. And you go into a store now, just a pharmacy, and you want to buy something worth $10, you have to open up a locked cabinet because if it were lying there, if it's worth $10, somebody's going to take it. And because they know in parts of the country that they're not going to be prosecuted if the amount is less than, $900 in some places, $800 in some places. But that's not the way it should be. When Rudy Giuliani was mayor, he went after people who jumped turnstiles, went after people who broke windows, went after people who did minor things, because his view was, if you get those people, you will reduce crime in general. There's an interesting study that was done, I think it was at the Harvard Kennedy School some years ago, about major criminals and major crime in major cities. And it turns out that a lot of the major crime in major cities are committed by a relatively small number of people who do it over and over and over again. They're let out on bail. They have to earn the money to hire the lawyer, so they earn it while they're out on bail by doing terrible things and robbing things. And then there are others who do even worse things in terms of physical violence. So what we're seeing is, a terrible, terrible regression. How what used to be a country that was so proud of its legal system. There was a period of time when I started to teach. It's now 62 years ago, 61 years ago. The American legal system was the standard around the world. Everybody looked up to the rule of law in America. Everybody looked up to American judges. We would be the ones who were invited to conferences all over the world. Today, I think, in many parts of the world, American justice is a laughing stock. It's seen as just an adjunct to the political system, and it's deeply divided. And, when people ask me, am I going to win this appeal? when I have to argue appeals, sometimes I have to say to them, wait until we hear who the judges are. Then I'll give you a better sense of whether we'll win or lose, because so many judges today just do partisan justice. They violate the rule of the Bible saying don't recognize faces. They not only recognize faces, they base their decision on that recognition. And so I'm glad that Donald Trump is fighting uh, in a way that is different from the way he previously fought. Previously, he was mostly on the defense. He was playing defense, and he did a great job. Obviously, he got all these cases dismissed uh, from the Supreme Court down. But now he's going a little bit more aggressively and a little bit more offensively, and I think that's the right approach, as long as he does it within the rule of law, and he is doing it within the rule of law. He's using not lawfare, he's using the Constitution to try to defend himself and to try to prevent others from using lawfare against him. And I think it's good to see lawsuits against judges. They're hard to win. They're very hard to win because judges protect themselves. And by the way, judges have even more immunity than presidents have, and even more immunity than senators have, even though senators and congressmen immunity is in the Constitution and judges' immunity is not. But you try to go after a judge, boy, both for practical reasons and for legal reasons, you can't. For practical reasons, you go after the judge. There are so many ways that judges can get back at you. But the courts won't recognize going after the judges. I've told you about this horrible case that established judicial immunity, a case where a father of a young girl, 14 or 15, was afraid her daughter would become pregnant because she was going out with a boy who he didn't like. And so he was a friend of the judge, and he had a secret meeting with the judge, and he got the judge to rule that she could have her tubes tied without her knowing that that's what was going on. So she was told she was having an appendix removed, and she got married a few years later, and she couldn't have any babies. And finally, the doctors told her the reason you can't have any babies, the tubes were tied. Then they did some research and they checked. It was a judicial opinion, so they sued the judge. Supreme Court said, no, he's a judge. He rendered an opinion. The opinion was a product of unlawful, unethical behavior, but nonetheless, the judge was held to be immune. And so people complain the president was held to be immune. Well, if anybody should have immunity above anybody else, it should be the president of the United States, who has to take decisions of life and death and decisions that involve world peace. And he can't be looking over his shoulder and worrying that what he said and what he did will come back to haunt him after he leaves the presidency. So, judicial immunity, you can live without it. You can live without senatorial immunity, but you can't live without presidential immunity. That's the key to everything successful. So, we'll know in the next few days, maybe we'll know by tomorrow, whether an appellate court will stay the sentencing. I don't think they will. I think they'll allow the sentencing to go forward, and so he'll be a convicted felon. He can try to get a stay of the judgment. I don't know whether or not that's permissible in New York, but then he can appeal immediately and put it on a fast track. I don't know if he wants to put it on a fast track. By that time, he'll be president. And I think a lot of people will have forgotten about it. But the Democrats are still going to say, he's a convicted felon. Even if he wins the case on appeal, they're going to say he's a convicted felon. I think he did the right thing in turning proactive, and I hope his lawyers do a good job, and I hope the courts do the right thing and make it clear that he can't be convicted based even in part on testimony that was based on what he did as president. But, beyond all that, I hope the appellate court doesn't just do it on that constitutional argument. I hope they just go back and look at the crime itself and issue an opinion saying, you just can't do this. You can't make up crimes. You can't prosecute people 34 times. As I've said before, 34 times 0 is 0. And that's what this is. This is a 0 case, even though there are 34 convictions. So it certainly should be reversed. Will it be reversed? Probably. But nobody can be certain, because The New York courts are subject to pressures as well from constituents, and the Supreme Court denies review, certiorari, in 90 whatever percent of its cases. So it's always uphill. But I think it was the right thing for President Trump and his lawyers to become more proactive. Let's see if the courts respond. Okay, let's turn to lots and lots of letters. Professor, can President Trump pardon John Eastman? No, he can't, because the two prosecutions are one in Arizona and the other in Georgia, and the president has no power to pardon for state cases. Now, it's interesting because the offenses that he's charged with really are offenses against the United States, although they're tried in state court. Maybe he'll make an argument, but I don't think the argument will succeed. Also, the disbarment is in California, a state bar, so I don't think the president could do that. I know he would if he could, and it would be the right thing to do, but I don't think he can. Where can we watch the lawfare movie? Well, it's now down. It's now loaded on television. I think it went up yesterday. I don't know the exact way of getting it, but if you just put in your, thing on the TV and say lawfare, John Eastman film, I think it'll come up, and it's really worth seeing. It's only a little over an hour, and I'd be interested in what you think. And as I told you, President Trump liked the movie a lot, except for one line in it, and he came over and told me he didn't like that line. You're wrong, he said. In the line, I said that although the Pennsylvania count was improper and unconstitutional, it wouldn't have made a difference in the general outcome of the election. And I think the election's outcome was fair, though not perfect. He didn't like that. And I told him I knew you wouldn't like it. But that's what I believe, and people shouldn't be prosecuted for their beliefs, whether their beliefs turn out to be right or wrong. And so the argument I make for John Eastman is made as strongly because I myself am not an advocate of the big steal. And so I'm just doing it on the basis of my view of the Constitution and the law. Okay, this is a good one. Does the president, when he becomes president, have the right to dispresent the Medal of Freedom to various recipients like Soros? No, you can't do that. Unfortunately, you can't do it. The Congressional Medal was created not by the president, but by Congress. The president, there's a committee. The president gets to make the final decision who gets it. But no, he can't take it away from anybody. I wish he could. It would have been the right thing to do. Okay, this is an interesting one. I can state categorically President Trump did not call for an insurrection. Why? Because I did not pack my Second Amendment tools, my guns, and drive to Washington, D.C. Had the president asked, I would have gone. So because he didn't go, therefore, the president didn't call for an insurrection. Well, it's a piece of evidence. It's a piece of evidence. And I don't believe the president called for an insurrection. The president said peacefully and patriotically, and that's what most of the people who went to the Capitol did. I'm not here to have a brief for any of the people who hurt other people physically, but the people who just walked in and protested and took their protest maybe a little too far by going into the Capitol, they should be pardoned, and I hope they are. Funny, my stumbling on this video. It sure rang a bell. Prior to 2022, I had no intention of voting for Trump. I ended up changing my mind 100% due to what I saw as the most sickening use of the legal system against a political opponent by the party in power in our nation's history. I knew that such behavior shouldn't be rewarded with a win or we were lost as a country. I can't be the only one whose vote was based on democratic malfeasance. No, I'm sure you're absolutely right. In fact, a number of people who voted for Trump told me they really voted against the Democrats, and a number of people who voted for Harris told me they voted against Trump. So votes are both for and against. Years ago, I saw A Reversal of Fortune. That's the film that my son, Elon, who's my producer here, was a producer on, and always wanted to know who you were in real life. I love your work, and I've followed you ever since. Thank you for your honesty. It's always refreshing, and above all, your explanations about the law are incredibly helpful and greatly appreciated. Well, couldn't do it without my son, Elon. He made the movie Reversal of Fortune. He helped pick the stars, Jeremy Irons and others, and the director. It's a great movie. It's always listed among the top, I don't know, 100 movies of history or something like that. And if you've never seen Reversal of Fortune, probably a good thing to do. You should probably see it. High Court should expedite and dismiss the New York conviction before January 20th. No, they can't do it. Unfortunately, because they have to do it by their rules, and their rules require first that you exhaust your state remedies. And only when you've exhausted your state remedies can you then take it to the Supreme Court on certiorari and then bring it to the federal court. Eventually, that may have to happen, but it can't happen on an expedited basis. I have to cut this one short a little bit because I have a speaking engagement, but see you tomorrow.